Okay, so I have a couple of objects inside my scene. I haven't saved anything yet, and that's pretty dangerous because in the event that our content crashes, we're going to lose all the hard work. I mean, by now we've created 2 cubes, and it would be a shame to lose all that hard work. So what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is quickly save our scene. I'll choose File, Save Scene. Now you can think of scenes, Unity uses scenes as individual scenes like you would in a movie or video editing, but we can think of scenes as individual levels. We create one scene. When we're done with that scene, we beat that scene or that level. We unload and then load a new scene. So we'll just call this scene, I'll call it level 1 or LVL01, and I'll save that in the default location, which is in my assets folder. Now, once I've saved that, what I can do is if I go to the project folder or the project tab and I click on my assets, you can see that I now have a Unity level, level 1, and this is the thing that I want to open to reveal this content inside the scene. So we're looking at our scene view. The scene that we're looking at is level 1. Okay, and I can confirm that if I look at the top of the Unity title bar here, you can see that it says level1.unity. So this is the scene that I'm working in. As we work on more complex projects and we work on multi-level games, we're going to have different scenes for different levels. Okay, so I'm back here focusing on my Gravity Lab project, and I have some unusual naming conventions here. I've just created 2 objects. They're both called cube. Not a good idea. So as I create objects and introduce new stuff into my scene, I want to give it an appropriate name. Main camera sounds good. That's the default name. But if I click on these 2 cubes, you can see that they're obviously named the same thing. So I want to update that. And I want to update that simply by with the object selected. Now I'm getting something strange here. It's kind of why I paused, because and I'll just move this cube out of the way. Those cubes, because they were occupying the exact same position, I had a hard time telling which object was selected. Okay, so I just grabbed the smaller cube, I moved it up a little bit, okay, and now I can tell the larger cube is down lower. There's 2 different ways that I can tell. I was kind of focusing on this axis system here, but those occupied the exact same space. But I could tell because you can see this green outline on my screen. That green outline is the selected polygon or the selected game object. So as I select the second cube, I can see that I have this green highlight surrounding it. Okay, so one good reason why you always want to keep your assets named is otherwise it's really confusing to tell what you have selected. So I'm going to go to this bottom cube. With it selected, I'm just going to left click on the title of that cube in the hierarchy. And with that selected, you can see that the title highlights. And so I'll just call this floor. This is going to be the floor of my project. I'll hit return to apply that name change. And then I have this other cube inside the scene. And I actually don't want this cube here for now. Or maybe I do, but I just demonstrate deleting an object. Now my instinct would tell me to hit the delete key, which I just did. And Unity beeped and told me it didn't do what I wanted to do. And that's kind of a fail-safe, because when it comes to programming, when we start using Playmaker or we start to get into scripting, hitting the delete key could be a key that we want to map to some kind of functionality. So Unity has this fail-safe built in to where hitting the delete key will not delete whatever object you have selected, at least in the case of the hierarchy. So there's a couple different ways you can delete an object. The first one is you can right-click on the object in the hierarchy, and you have a couple different options here. You can rename, you can duplicate, and of course you can delete. Now I'll deselect that, because another way that you can delete is by selecting the object either through the user interface or through the hierarchy, and then if you hold down the command key and hit delete, that will delete the object. Okay, so at this point I just have a simple floor inside my scene. I actually want to get a little bit more geometry, a couple of other game objects inside the scene just for a little contrast. So I'll go back to game object, create other, and I'll throw another cube into the scene. Now, having a hard time seeing my cube, I'll just lift it straight up, and there it goes. It kind of emerges and pops out of my scene. So just like if you have any experience, if you've taken the 3D design class, or if you have any other experience in 3D, it's always a good practice to make sure that you only move content according to one axis at a time. That'll make sure that all the content remains aligned. I'll also pay attention to what's going on in the transform component, especially the position. So if I want to keep these objects aligned, I'll make sure that all the coordinates are zeroed out. Now if I move that along the y-axis, I know that this object is right on top of the other object. So this cube that I have floating in space, I'm going to rename this cube Bumper. And so for this project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to play around with the Unity physics engine and create a real simple kind of passive simulation. We'll throw some objects into the scene and let the physics engine take over and see what we can do with just a real simple scene inside Unity. Now I am going to dress up the scene a little bit. We'll throw some lights and some materials in there so we understand the basic conventions of building and modifying assets inside Unity. But in order to get this demonstration just up and running, I have a couple of different game objects in the scene. And if I wanted to run this game or run this simulation at this point, I could hit the play button and not much is going to happen. So we're looking through the camera. I'm not crazy about the camera perspective, and obviously we got a major lighting issue here. Not very compelling. So I'm going to toggle that play button off one more time. And I'm going to introduce a really simple lighting setup. So I'll go to the Game Object pull-down menu, Create Other, and I'll choose Directional Light. Now, a directional light is a light that is infinitely far away. It's something we can think of the directional light as kind of like the sun. It's coming from a specific direction. It's not an object like we might find in a point light or a spotlight. So this light has a direction to it, and if we look at, we have this directional light selected, and if we look over in the inspector, we can see that it has a position, but we can ignore that. What we're most interested in is the rotation. And if I change the rotation of one of these values, you can see that as I rotate the X, I can change the angle of that light. In addition to changing the angle, if I want to change the color, I can adjust the color of this light slightly. I'll add a little bit of, just a little bit of red or maybe a little bit of yellow to that light. And I can influence the intensity of that light. So this is a directional light. Now when I hit the play button and I look through my scene, it's a little more compelling. I can start to see a little bit more volume inside my scene, but I still don't like the camera perspective. I'll turn the play button off. I'm going to select that main camera. Now I can see the camera's position in space, but it's a little confusing as to what I'm looking at here. So what I want to do is I want to orbit around just a bit, and I'll zoom way out so we can see a little better what's going on here. Now what's going on, I'll zoom way out, is we have this camera. It's got a really wide angle of view. I'll zoom back in so we can see our models again. And it's projecting, and we can see its plane of vision here. So this will orient us a little bit. If I lift up on the y-axis, I can look through this camera preview here and see how I'm changing the camera view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift it up a little bit, and then I'm going to rotate the angle, and I want to rotate around, in this case, it's the red axis or the x-axis, and I'll rotate, which will cause the camera to pitch down a little bit. So I'll go to rotation, I'll go to X, and I'll just roll that in one direction. I can see that I'm reducing the value. That's not the direction I want to go, so I'll just drag that back down to the right. There we go. And I feel like I'm a little far away, so I'll just kind of slide that forward on the Z-axis. So that looks pretty good, and I'm just looking through this camera preview here. Now, that's still a really flat scene, and one thing that's going to help quite a bit, it'll help with my orientation, and it'll help with my the general relative space between the objects is to turn shadows on in the lighting. So if I go back to the directional light, and I look back at the inspector, and I look at the light component here, you'll see that there are shadow type, and I'll just choose hard shadows from that drop-down menu. Now I have the light casting a hard shadow, so I can orient in this space a little more. So if I go back to my scene view, if I toggle the play button off here, it'll take me back to my scene view, and I'll zoom back in on my project. Okay, so just a little bit about modifying the objects in space, arranging those in space, and turning on the lights, and we'll start to add a little bit of, we'll turn the physics engine on, but we'll do that in the next presentation.